Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, we're going to be focusing on just one car, this 1969 Mazda. But first things first, what exactly is this? Would you believe this car is so seldom talked about and so rarely seen that people can't even settle on what to call this car? If you were to go search online right now, you might see this model referred to as an R130. That would be in reference to the 13A rotary engine that's under the hood. You may also see it called an RX-87. RX-87 is the designation Mazda gave to this car when it was still a prototype under development. Now, they did include RX-87 badging on the production model, but that's not technically the name of this car. You may also see it referred to as an M13P. That is a prefix for the VIN code. If you hear someone today refer to an RX-7 as an FB, an FC, or FD, well, that is similar to when someone is calling this car an M13P. It is baked into the VIN code, and all of these models began with that prefix. What this car actually is a Luce. However, to make things even more confusing, Mazda was also building piston-powered Luces in sedan and station wagon form at the same time they built this car. So to differentiate this model from its piston-powered brothers, Mazda added badging denoting this as the rotary coupe. And while it shares similar design, that's strictly where the similarities end, because the chassis and everything else about this car is different from the sedan and station wagon piston models. So if you hear someone referring to this as an R130, RX-87, an M13P, a Luce, they're all talking about the same model, the Luce rotary coupe. Well, now that we have identified it, let's talk a little about the history behind this Luce rotary coupe. By the early 1960s, many Japanese automakers were turning to Italy for assistance in designing a car that would appeal to the masses. The post-war recovery was in full swing, and consumers were looking for something more than your typical commuter K car or stripped-down econobox. In 1962, Toyo Kogyo, or Mazda, would enter an agreement with their Bertone house in Turin. Chief designer Giorgetto Giugiaro would lend his hand in creating what Mazda briefed would be a four-door sedan with front-wheel drive, powered by their newest development, the twin-rotary piston engine. The results of this effort? A dignified saloon with an elongated sloping hood, headlights inset behind plexiglass covers, and a lot of glass creating an almost greenhouse effect. Over the years, a rumor had been tossed around that this model was actually intended for Alfa Romeo, who had rejected the proposal. But later these rumors would be dispelled. Even in the official photographs taken at the Bertone facility, we can see that the rendering sports Mazda rotary badging on the C-pillar. Indeed, it was always intended for Mazda. The model would be designated the S8P. However, there was a slight problem. Development of the rotary engine that was to be showcased in this effort was taking longer than expected. Instead, the design would be used for a smaller piston engine sedan. A rear-wheel drive 1500cc four-cylinder named the Luce was released in 1966. In-house Mazda designers, in particular Tainanja Oda, are credited with tweaking and making tasteful refinements to the SAP. However, there is no mistaking that Giugiaro's original design was the basis for this model. At the Tokyo Motor Show in 1967, Mazda would display experimental model RX-87, the rotary-powered two-door coupe. Driven by its front wheels and loaded with an assortment of creature comforts, Mazda was determined to prove they could deliver a luxury grand tour to a segment of the market that had been previously out of reach to them. The prototype model featured completely hidden headlights, similar to the American Camaro Rally Sport, a well-appointed interior with cloth houndstooth upholstery, and 14-inch radials on steel wheels. It was a mash of European sophistication and American muscle. Other variants of the RX-87 prototype featured a grille consisting of horizontal bars that ran the entire width of the front end. In the end, they opted for a similar grille layout that was already being used on the piston-engined Luces, with a simple horizontal grille and exposed quad headlights. Unmistakably Italian. So what makes this a holy grail car? Well, let's start with production numbers. Between 1969 and 1971, only 976 units were ever built. And then there's the drivetrain. This would be the only model ever fitted with the 13A rotary engine. It was taller and provided more low-end torque than the previous 10A used in the Cosmo Sport. It would also be the only rotary production car Mazda would ever utilize a front-wheel drive system in. Weighing a hefty 2,600 pounds and a top speed of 118 miles per hour, it was rated at 124 horsepower and 127 foot-pounds of torque at 3,500 RPM. While color choices were limited, either Eiger white or moonlight yellow, amenities and interior appointments were not. Mazda would throw nearly every available option of its time into the Luce rotary coupe, including air conditioning, power steering, power brakes, power windows, tilt steering, intermittent wipers, 8-track stereo with power antenna, rear window defroster and defogger blower, reclining bucket seats with cloth upholstery, and a fully finished trunk. It would be Mazda's first attempt into the luxury grand touring market, and the price tag would reflect it. In 1969, the cost of a super deluxe well-appointed model was 1.75 million yen, the most expensive in Mazda's lineup for that model year. Adjusting for inflation, that would be the equivalent of $45,000 US today. Well, for anyone who's ever been behind the wheel of a rotary engine car, quiet is definitely not the word you would use to describe the driving characteristics. In fact, the brap of a rotary engine and quiet have seemed to grow into contradictory terms over the years. But this Luce rotary coupe is every bit as quiet as what you expect out of a luxury grand tourer. I'm not sure if that's the result of the longer throw of the taller 13A rotary engine, or if Mazda engineers just put a lot of sound deadening material in all the right places. The steering wheel is handsomely designed. As you can see, it's made of real timber, three metal spokes with the rotary emblem adorning the horn button here in the center. But it is rather large. It kind of feels like it's sitting right in your lap, like you're driving a school bus. But with the power steering on this car, it is very light. I mean, I can easily steer this car with my pinky finger, and there's just no effort whatsoever. And while that might add to the convenience and the ease of steering the car, it does kind of take a little bit of feel away from the road. So you don't have as much connection to the road as you would with a manually steering car, and steering becomes more just kind of point in the general vicinity, and it's not quite as precise as you would feel with a manual steering system. These cars have four-wheel independent suspension. So in the front, it's a double wishbone with a gas-filled shock, and they use heavy rubber torsion springs. So Mazda used that technology on some of its K cars of the early 60s, the R360 and the Carol, and they wanted to use it on this heavier Grand Touring car, specifically because it helps absorb road noise. So how many of these front-wheel drive relics still remain today? Well, in 2019, Mazda commissioned a study to determine how many of their rotary engine production cars were still registered with the Japanese government. The results were not good. Only 40 M13Ps were still registered for road use. Now, this doesn't take into account cars that have been deregistered and perhaps being restored or sitting in museums. It also doesn't take into account a handful of cars that have been scattered around the world and currently sit in the garages of collectors. But given the fact that this car used a one-off power plant and the climate in Japan is not friendly to sheet metal, it would not be a stretch of the imagination to assume that there may be under 100 examples still remaining in existence. Well, there you have it. Elegant Italian design, all the options you could ask for of its time, powered by an engine featuring cutting-edge technology, but with a hefty price tag. From a strictly dollars and cents perspective, you would have to say the Luce Rotary Coupe was not a successful endeavor for Mazda. Using an engine and transmission layout that was specific to this model alone, the tooling and build costs had to far outweigh any revenue garnered from the sale of less than 1,000 units. But it was another example of their resiliency and perseverance to bring rotary-powered technology to the market when all of the other automakers had given up. It would also serve as a statement to the world that Mazda should be taken seriously as an automaker and could definitely play in the same sandbox as the big boys. I hope you have enjoyed this feature on what has been a holy grail car for me for the past 30 years. We'll see you next time, and remember, save the Cutius.